Yeah, I should read this more closely before I get up here, right? All in favor? Okay. Okay, thank you, Lincoln. That is why in 2009, along with my colleagues and the council, I passed Local Law 31, requiring the Mayor's Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability, now known the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, to draft a comprehensive wetlands protection strategy for the city, the overall goals of which were to conserve, protect, enhance, restore, and expand the city's wetlands, and to standardize its approach to wetlands management. This law requires a drafting and publication of a report to be submitted to the Commissioner of DEP and the Commissioner of Parks and Recreation no later than July 15th, 2009, with an update published no later than July 15th every second year thereafter. Since then, meaning since the law was passed, only one report has been published in relation to this law in 2012. In 2016 and 2021, the Natural Areas Conservancy, in conjunction with the Parks Department, released the Wetlands Management Framework for New York City, but it is unclear if those documents are meant to satisfy the requirements of Local Law 31. This reporting requirement created by local law is not a suggestion, it is the law. Again, this is not this administration, this is another administration, so, you know. This administration must do its due diligence in publishing and submitting the required report in a timely manner and not whenever it deems convenient. But that's not this administration. I would like to thank the great committee staff who have done such great work over the years, committee counsels Samara Swanson and Claire McLaughlin, policy analyst Ricky Chola and Andrew Bourne, financial analyst Andrew Lane Lawless, finally my legislative director, Nabi Kaur, for all of their hard work. Let me recognize the members of the Environmental Protection, Resiliency, and Waterfronts Committee who are here. We have Councilmember Holden, Councilmember Ressler, Councilmember Menon, Councilmember Nurse, Councilmember Hanks is joining us on Zoom. Before I turn it over to my co-chair, just a little bit of housekeeping. There's this phenomenon that's been creeping up in some council hearings lately where witnesses ask questions of the panel. We don't answer questions, so we're here to hear from you. We ask you questions. So any questions directed at us will be ruled out of order by me. And we also want the testimony. We have a lot of witnesses to be on topic. We understand that people are passionate about funding for parks. This is not a budget hearing. This council stands squarely in favor of tree canopy development. That's why in the last stated meeting a couple of days ago, we passed the boccia bill to require the 30% canopy. Of course, the challenge is to figure out how to pay for that, and a lot of people are here to talk about that. This is not a budget hearing, so it's just like we get that the 30% number is really important. We'll let folks make their point, but generally speaking, we want to stay on topic. We have the oversight topic, we've got the bill, and we got the reso, and we want focused testimony on those. So I was just a bad guy shaker, so you didn't have to say any of that stuff, okay? And with that, it is my great privilege to recognize my esteemed co-chair, Chair Shekhar Krishnan, Chair of the Parks Committee. I recognize Chair Krishnan.
Thank you so much, Chair Gennaro. It's an honor to co-chair this hearing with you, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Councilmember Shekhar Krishnan, Chair of the Committee on Parks and Recreation, and I'd like to thank my fellow co-chair, Councilmember Gennaro, for agreeing to hold this joint hearing today, which unfortunately comes with very good timing given the recent events in New York City just a couple weeks ago when it comes to our climate. The climate crisis is here. We all know that all too well, and painfully so, and its effects threaten the well-being of all New Yorkers. One of the more immediate effects, which has been particularly damaging to the city this year, as we know, is flooding. These flooding events, most recently including Tropical Storm Ophelia, were rain events that laid bare the inadequacy of the city's infrastructure to handle massive rainfall. Once again, large areas of the city that had never seen significant flooding before were shockingly underwater. And once again, this past summer, where a multitude of severe weather events have occurred throughout the world, this has set a new unfortunate milestone for being the hottest summer on record. Over and over again, the storms, the flooding, the events that are considered once in 100 years are happening once every year, every couple years. And it's a signal of how urgent the climate crisis is right here in our city. We are a city surrounded by water. And so the necessity for New York to be ever prepared for these increasingly harsh storms is growing more and more important. Despite these climate change events, however, there is still time, though the clock is ticking, to prepare and adapt our infrastructure to better handle what will continue to come our way in the future. Our focus at today's joint hearing will be on how the city's parks and wetlands can best be adapted to mitigate the effects of climate change, such as flooding and extreme heat. There is still time to prepare and adapt our infrastructure to better handle what will continue to come our way in the future, particularly by increasing the use of green infrastructure and making our parks more resilient. The city's green space can be adapted to expand the resiliency features, such as through the use of expanding the Green Streets program, building more rain gardens in areas that are starved of green space, broadening the reach of park features to their surrounding neighborhoods, building more parks and playgrounds with bioswales, green features, and permeable surfacing, converting unused or abandoned land into green space, and of course, maintaining and expanding the city's tree stock. There are important pieces of legislation that we've passed in this council to address these issues and expand green space where none has existed before. On top of that, just last week, our city council and the week before passed historic legislation to invest in and expand our tree canopy. And of course, we've also looked at ways to increase and improve water safety in our city too, which is just as much a part of the climate crisis as every other emergency that we face. All of those things are crucial. But I also want to call attention to the fact that we will not be able to make our city environmentally resilient until we invest in our park system the way it should be. And we will not have a park system that reflects in resources the value it holds for all of us, from a climate standpoint to our health and well-being. We will not have a park system with the resources that reflect that value until we achieve at least 1% of our city budget for parks. Something that we need to do not only because it is crucial for our city, it is crucial for climate change, but it is also our city catching up with every other major city in the United States. Our parks are essential to our health and well-being. The Parks Department has been heavily part of this process, specifically to address climate change, specifically when they developed resiliency guidelines in November 2017 entitled Design and Planning for Flood Resiliency, Guidelines for NYC Parks, which is part of the broader Plan NYC framework. The guidelines serve as a manual for planners, designers, and communities to reference while planning and developing coastally resilient parks and waterfront spaces. In particular, the guidelines discuss certain beach and boardwalk best practices, including the development of a plan for necessary beach nourishment to ensure the best possible performance during and after a storm, elevating boardwalks to be higher than the 100-year floodplain, and the usage of concrete planks set on top of concrete and steel piles to create stronger and more resilient boardwalks. I'm curious to see how this has informed the process by which the Parks Department has developed and renovated its various properties to become more resilient, and whether recent storms have altered in any way how the department thinks about its resiliency planning. I'd like to ensure this joint hearing explores and clarifies some points relating to parks and resiliency as well, including how federal funding from the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act are being allocated to enhance parks resiliency work, this federal funding plays a crucial role in supporting our parks and green spaces. I'd also like to hear more about the role that parks will play in the Climate Strong Community Project and the progress that has been made in implementing practices from the Wetlands Management Framework, and also how parks will adapt to, as I mentioned before, the unacceptable budget cuts that Mayor Adams has recently proposed in a way that not only cuts from our parks' vital services, but also to understand how they will affect any resiliency projects. The time to act is now. We must urgently work to address this climate crisis and invest in the parts of our infrastructure, our parks, our playgrounds, our coastlines, to fortify and protect our city from the worsening climate crisis. We are already behind the ball, and so we cannot afford any delay in implementing resiliency projects that are crucial to our being able to withstand the worst effects of the climate crisis. Here, too, our parks are on the front lines when it comes to this work. Thank you to everyone who has joined today, for members of the administration for your testimony, and for our members of the public and advocates who are testifying too, and for your participation in this hearing. I'd like to recognize our colleagues who are here today as part of this committee. Councilmember Holden, Councilmember Lee, Councilmember Marte, Councilmember Menon, Councilmember Ressler, Councilmember Ung, Councilmember Carr, and Councilmember Brooks Powers. Thank you, and I will turn it over to our committee counsel to swear in today's witnesses.
Can you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth today? That's it.
You may begin.
All right. Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Gennaro, Chair Krishnan, members of the Environmental Protection and Parks and Recreation Committees. My name is Rit Agarwal. I'm Chief Climate Officer of New York City and Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection. And I am joined today by Elijah Hutchinson, our new Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, and Merritt Larson, Assistant Commissioner of Natural Resources and Planning at the Department of Parks. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on New York City's climate resilience efforts. As Chair Christian just said, climate change is here. We have all witnessed its impact as recently as 2 weeks ago with Tropical Storm Ophelia. Since day one, the Adams administration has been focused on better preparing the city for the impacts of climate change, including creating my role. As part of my role, I oversee MOCEJ, which leads the city's efforts to ensure New York City is reducing its emissions while also protecting New Yorkers from the intensifying impacts of climate change. With a focus on equity and public health, MOCEJ works to make buildings efficient and resilient, ensure infrastructure is climate ready, transform streets and the public realm into living open spaces, and make energy clean and resilient. And I'm particularly excited about the addition of Executive Director Hutchinson to the office. He previously led coastal resilience and greenway initiatives as Vice President for waterfronts at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. His work and ideas will be central to this city's climate policy, including resilience, and I am pleased to have him as my colleague. I will depart from the text here because in putting together what we thought was a reasonably comprehensive but still high-level summary of all we're doing, it came to 5,000 words. And rather than read all of it to you, I leave it to you to read. I will give you a couple of high points and then conclude. But I do want you to know we're doing a lot. A lot of it is shaped, and Chair Krishnan, alluded to this. I think relatively few New Yorkers appreciate that in 2020, the National Climate Assessment recategorized New York City from a continental weather zone to the subtropical climate zone, right? So literally our climate has changed. This is not something that's coming down the pike. It has in fact already happened. And that is not coincidentally why at about the same time we started to see a significant change in flooding. But there is a lot that we are doing to play catch up, as I think as both chairmen mentioned. We are working on Coastal resilience as part of Plan YC, in addition to continuing the work that was undertaken in the last two administrations in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, and continuing to work very closely with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on the harbor and tributary study, we have actually recognized that it is time to create a permanent home within city government for the multi-decade work that it will take to create coastal resilience for New York City. We decided that DEP is the correct home for that, and so actually I'm pleased to say that very soon we will begin the process of standing up a new Bureau of Coastal Resilience. I think there is likely to be a need, and Chair Gennaro and I have discussed the fact that at some point we will probably seek out your collective assistance in legislating that as part of the agency's formal role, but it is something that we are not waiting to get started on. Starting last year, we also at DEP began to undertake a broad look at what it will require, in fact, to bring the city's stormwater management systems up to handle this new reality that we face. There was some very good work done in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Ida by the de Blasio administration. We have incorporated virtually everything from that into the plans that we are now working on through Plan YC and others. In fact, we recently did a tally, and basically 95% of what was in the new normal report is either completed or in progress, or it has been replaced by something that is in Plan YC that accomplishes the same goal. So there was not something that we walked away from. It is an evolutionary process that frankly expands as we get smarter about the task. Last year, my agency with the mayor released two programs. One explicitly about short-term flood response. We called it Rainfall Ready. I'm pleased we've worked with a number of you all to use your offices to help do things like distribute flood barriers and make residents aware of their flood risk. Part of Rainfall Ready was actually publishing flood maps that show precisely by borough, block, and lot level the flood risk that each address in New York City faces. That allowed us, for example, to target the 1,600 most flood-prone residential addresses to which we proactively reached out to offer them flood barriers and information about flood insurance and things like that. However, the reality is that changing infrastructure, whether it's green infrastructure on the surface or gray infrastructure underground, is both very expensive and very long-term. I'm naturally impatient, and my staff knows that I keep asking, why is this a multi-year planning process? And as I have come to appreciate what goes into it, I have come to appreciate just how difficult it is to change something as powerful as water in a place as crowded and complex and expensive to do work in as New York City. So one of our sad realities is, as I have said many times, the climate is changing faster than our infrastructure can keep up. And among the things we need to do, and I'll come back to this, is figure out how we as a city can in fact make our processes faster and more capacious so we can do more things at once, even if we can't do all things faster. Among the things that we have done, and again, there's a lot of detail in the written testimonies we've made. In the written testimony, we've made significant progress and continue to on Blue Belts. We have great ambitions for the Blue Belt program, well beyond Staten Island, even though it's a Staten Island native, of course. We are working on Cloudburst, and we are in fact ahead of schedule with more Cloudburst projects that we are working on than we're committed to in the new normal report at the end of 2021, so we're very pleased by those. As I think many of you know, back last year, DEP implemented the Unified Stormwater Rule, which requires large properties, when they are constructed upon or when significant changes happen on a given parcel, that they have to begin to manage stormwater on site. Any stormwater managed on site prevents it from flowing into overtaxed sewers during a heavy rainstorm, and therefore that directly prevents flooding. In addition, in most parts of the city, that kind of work also reduces combined sewer overflows, which contributes to the clean harbor that we all know and care about. We've made significant progress over the last 2 years with the FloodNet sensor program, which I was certainly looking at all day long on September 29th, and I would imagine some of you may have been as well. It is far from complete, and among the things we have been doing consistently, I will not say actually in response to that storm, because we were doing it well before that, is trying to figure out how we can change that program in its details or augment it so that it can be built out more quickly. We are currently in year 2 of a 5-year build, but that is making a lot of headway already, and actually I think it was quite useful on September 29th to be able to see what was going on. As I think Chair Krishnan alluded to, the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice has already kicked off the early planning work around climate strong communities, which is our neighborhood level effort at engaging with communities to do multi-hazard planning. And we are working on a voluntary buyout program, which is another one of these things like the Bureau of Coastal Resilience, where it takes a while to figure out the institutional issues. It's not just about having the money, although buyouts in New York City are going to be breathtakingly expensive, but it is also about how you do the institution so that legally we can conduct transactions that are frankly very unlike the transactions that the city's land acquisition policies and practices are designed for. You know, just think about the question of how you pay fair market value for a property that has been destroyed. Legally, we have to pay only fair market value, right? So there's a lot of institutional work that we have to put in place right now, and MOCEJ, in conjunction with several other agencies, is leading that planning work, and we're optimistic about where that will go. One final thing before I move on is heat. And I think you both Chair Gennaro and Chair Krishnan mentioned the fact that flooding is not our only risk, that as part of being a subtropical city, we now have a significant heat program, and as I have said on many occasions, we are keenly aware of the fact that despite the terrible losses we suffered during Hurricane Ida and Hurricane Sandy, heat over the last decade is still the way climate change has killed most New Yorkers, right? That we think more than 350 New Yorkers have died as an excess number over previous patterns due to the higher heat levels that we've experienced during the summer over the last decade. It's one of the reasons that this administration has committed to work towards, and this is actually going to be extraordinarily difficult to figure out, but to work towards a maximum indoor temperature. The reality is the vast majority of bedrooms in New York City have air conditioning. Those who don't live in affordable housing, those who don't live in NYCHA, those who don't live in places where the economics of it are not going to be easy to figure out. But it is something that we are committed to. And I will also make the point that we cannot stop thinking about mitigation, that we have to make sure that we work to reduce our carbon emissions, because the first thing you do when you find yourself in a hole is stop digging. And we've got to help make this problem not get any worse than it already is. And that's among the reasons that I'm very proud of the proposal that this administration has put out for how to implement Local Law 97. We think it is thoughtful. We think it is actually very aggressive. We also think it is correctly designed to work with and take into account the needs of building owners. And among the things that I hope we can have help with from members of the City Council is ensuring that as the State Public Service Commission defines the way it will use the next $5 billion of systems benefit charge money that is going to be raised from the electric bills of New Yorkers and programmed, that they use it in a way that directly helps buildings comply with Local Law 97, which is, I think, one of the most important opportunities we have, and one that I am desperately worried we will let slip away if the state and Con Edison do not choose to work with us in a collaborative way. Another area where we could use your help, and I know Chairman Gennaro, you've been tremendously helpful in this respect already, and Chair Krishnan, you alluded to this, is around New York City getting its fair share of federal and state money. The reality is we do not. We do not get our fair share of federal and state money because, in fact, a large portion of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding is put through the state And unfortunately, New York State has decided to apply rules to how it disperses that money, particularly with respect to DEP infrastructure that could contribute towards the overall effort for stormwater resilience, that categorically excludes municipalities of more than 300,000 people from applying for those grant funds. We think that decision, purely an administrative decision, it's neither regulation nor it is law, is going to cost New York City $1 billion in federal funding that it would otherwise be eligible for. And I know the committee has put forward some questions about the Environmental Bond Act, $4.2 billion for environmental efforts, including, for example, $250 million dedicated for voluntary buyouts. The state has not put out guidelines for the vast majority of that money yet. We do not know whether it will be equitably distributed. But I do know that New York City is roughly 60% of the tax base, and so New York City residents will pay 60% of that $4.2 billion, and we have to make very clear to Albany that we should be able to get our fair share. I will return now to the last 2 pages of my written testimony, but all of the things I've covered are in there, and by the way, actually, I will also say to Intro 1069, of course, we're very concerned about water quality, whether it's in the harbor, which my agency pays very close attention to, or in other water bodies. We have a very extensive testing program across multiple agencies right now that is primarily driven by the state, both the Department of Health and the Department of Environmental Conservation. And we certainly share the bill's intention to be able to know what is going on in our water and assure New Yorkers that it is safe. We would look forward to working with the committee to ensure that this bill does not add unnecessary cost without creating value or wind up working at cross purposes to the practices that we have already overseen by our state regulators. So we're very happy to work with you on that. I'll conclude with a couple of points here. Major physical projects, and I'll go back to the written text, major physical projects take a significant amount of time. Typically 1 to 3 years for planning and design, 1 to 2 years for procurement, and from 1 to 4 years of construction. To reduce this time would require changes to several processes, such as environmental review, ULURP when acquisitions are required, and procurement rules. DEP has invested significantly in improving our procurement with great success. We have reduced a nearly 2-year procurement cycle a year and a half ago down to just 1 year, just 1 year. Further, we have improved internal processes to increase our commitment rate for capital projects. One of my big disappointments of fiscal year 22 was that we achieved only a 69% commitment rate for the year, which meant that in that fiscal year, DEP left nearly $500 million in capital on the table, unspent. Through a significant whole-of-agency effort, we are proud to report that for the first time in a decade, DEP achieved our capital commitment target in fiscal year 23, reaching 103% of our $2.3 billion capital plan. In fact, we committed $2.4 billion in new capital projects, a year-on-year increase of $800 million in new projects breaking ground for construction or starting into design. We've also contributed to the Capital Process Reform Task Force convened by Mayor Adams and Controller Lander. Last year, the task force released a set of recommendations, including using price adjustment allowance to offset volatile commodity markets, expanding work allowances to reduce change order approvals, and amending procurement laws and regulations. Also significantly, the task force has made recommendations for the city to adopt alternative project delivery mechanisms such as progressive design build, and has proposed that the DDC become an authority. We strongly support these recommendations, as these efforts will speed up capital projects, reduce costs, and increase the city's capacity to address emerging needs. And I will just say, I think those are some of the things, as we look to do this work, we need help in clearing the obstacles to getting work done. Projects face the same delays. It doesn't matter whether it's a resilience project, a water main project, whatever it is, you all face the same sort of delays. Anything we can do to speed up our ability to deliver capital projects, is going to make the city more resilient. And anything we do that slows that down is going to hinder our ability to achieve resilience. There aren't a lot of easy ways to speed up an individual project, but we also face constraints on how many we can take on at once. This is basically a function of DEP's planning and engineering capacity and DDC's engineering and contracting capacity. I would welcome any help the City Council can offer in figuring out how to increase DEP's and DDC's capacity to deliver projects, or how the city's design, procurement, and construction timetables can be speeded up. Climate work is generational, and because of that, there are trade-offs. For example, we must balance water rate affordability with our resilience considerations. Stormwater projects are breathtakingly expensive. Starting last year, DEP has been working on a set of example projects to understand by extrapolation what it would take to create true stormwater resilience across the city. We expect to have a bit to say on that later this year and much more to say on that next spring. In 2021, my predecessor estimated it would require a cost of $100 billion, which would require water rates to go up by about 500%. 500% increase in water rates to pay for something like that. Depending on the level of stormwater resilience we want, we may have to brace for dramatic increases in water bills. And this is not theoretical. As we at DEP begin work towards our fiscal year 25 capital plan, it would be helpful to know what council members think about how much to invest, given that all of our investments in stormwater resilience are passed along in the water bill, unless we can get state or federal money. We must also consider the importance of affordable housing to resilience work. 3 key strategies for resilience, requiring air conditioners, protecting people who live in basement apartments, and the voluntary mobility program to remove people who live in at-risk properties, are likely to directly reduce the city's affordable housing supply. We cannot have both affordable housing and resilience unless we dramatically increase the creation of new housing across the city. And we need to recognize that some homes are impossible to protect from flooding. MOCEJ has been collaborating closely with the Department of City Planning on City of Yes zoning for housing opportunity, which was kicked off in September, which includes dealing with the issues of basement apartments and flood risk, and the considerations of climate hazards when siting and building new housing. We have worked closely with our colleagues at the Parks Department, working to explore opportunities for blue belts for stormwater resilience and coastal protection on the large portion of the city's waterfront that is parkland. But the reality is that there will be times where parks uses and resilience uses are at odds, or at very least, cause delay and increased cost. Right now, the protection afforded to parkland ensures parks objectives will take precedence, but that is a reality that we have to acknowledge. I would welcome the council's advice on how to balance these trade-offs. Some of these are political more than technical, so they're very appropriate for electeds to opine on. All New Yorkers, especially those who own their own homes, also must take responsibility for protecting themselves and their property. As I've said many times, for 400 years, New Yorkers have enjoyed a relatively mild climate, but this is no longer the case. The city can and should and will do as much as it can, but tropical rainstorms are difficult to predict, and New Yorkers will need to protect themselves. Anyone who owns a home needs to have flood insurance. Homeowners should disconnect their downspouts from their roofs so they do not connect to the sewer line, which often causes sewer backups inside the home, even when the city's sewer is not at capacity. And homeowners need to stop and reverse the paving over of permeable surfaces, which has increased the proportion of stormwater that runs into our sewers during the strongest rains. I know many of you have worked closely with us to raise awareness through events such as rain barrel giveaways, and I very much appreciate those efforts, and I would welcome more ways that the City Council could help us encourage New Yorkers to do their part. There is, of course, a lot more in this long testimony. I have a number of colleagues, in addition to the 2 who are here at the table, to answer your questions. I very much appreciate these 2 committees coming together to tackle this really difficult but utterly important issue, and I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think on behalf of all of us, we thank you for your comprehensive testimony and for all the reading material that you provided for us. 5,000 words is a lot, and we appreciate the comprehensive nature of your testimony. I'm going to be very brief. It's always my habit or my practice to, we have members here that want to participate in a significant way, so I'll be very brief in order to open the door for all the members with their great ideas to pose questions. My committee is now, we've been joined by Councilmember Velasquez. Very happy to have her here. I just made some notes as you were going through your statement, and I'll just ask a little bit about that. With regard to all that the administration is doing with regard to stormwater, I made notes on the front of your. We got the rainfall ready, cloudburst technology, the blue belts, unified stormwater rule, the flood net sensor program. We had spoken a while ago, you and I, because I had vision, because way back, I don't know, 2007, whatever it is, the council did the first comprehensive stormwater management plan. That was really more for CSOs than it was for street flooding, and that accomplished. We can go on and on about all the good things that did accomplish, and so now we're at stormwater management 2.0, so to speak, where we're really concerned about street flooding, and I was going to hold back on my bill because there was so much coming out of DEP and MOCEJ that was going to be crystallized into a grand stormwater management plan, and you made reference to the fact that there'll be something big coming out. I imagine that what that is everything all wrapped up in a bow in terms of this is what we want to do regarding stormwater management going forward. And then my plan was then to, and that would be a great policy document, but then I thought it would be great to crystallize that into law, which is what we did with the stormwater management plan. Does that still seem like a good paradigm to you?
So I think certainly at some point the idea of legislating a plan may make sense. I would ask, if you don't mind, that we wait until this first piece of work comes out.
Yeah, I've been waiting.
I will say, and just to manage expectations, it is not going to be everything we want all wrapped up in a bow. It is the first step towards that. I'm thinking about it a bit as kind of an options paper, so we can begin collectively as a city to wrap our brains around what this might actually take, because there are a number of big changes that you could imagine needing, and certainly big projects, even if they don't wind up visually being challenging.
Yeah, I just think it's I think it's a noble, and one that has worked for you and me and for the council in the city going way back to the first Plan YC, when we took some of the good initiatives out of that and we crystallized them into law, and then that is I think served the city well. So let me just say that I think on behalf of the council, we stand ready as a partner for you to do what seems to make sense in terms of what elements of that new plan should be reduced to legislation, so that would carry forward. And I think that our institution should bear some of the burden of doing what we need to do in concert with the administration to let people know how serious this is and how much it's going to cost. And so, we have this is really an offer to burden share is really what it is. And so we certainly appreciate that. And one thing that, and again, with all of the, focus on flooding from all of the storms, Of course, this is a hearing on resiliency. And I know we have the HAT study and all that, that's talking about a whole bunch of different things, but what I'm not, what I'm somewhat afraid of having it get lost in all the flooding that we're talking about is storm surge. And, you know, this certainly still, you know, was, is, and will be the most threatening, clear and present danger. Although with the street flooding of late, I think, you know, I think storm surge has kind of like a run for its money with everything that we're doing and all the flooding that we're having. And I have, you know, long been a fan of, you know, storm surge barriers or whatever. People have different ideas about that. But if you could just tell us where we are with regard to, you know, getting out in front of and planning for storm surge, I just, that has to be part of the equation. That has to be part of the conversation.
Thank you. Yes, and certainly, and so there's a couple of things there. First of all, there are a number of projects. Sorry, if I don't cite my list, I'm going to miss a couple. But there are a number of. Actually, you've got it. Yeah. So I'll ask Elijah to talk to some of the projects that are going on. But quickly, we've got a set of projects right now that the city is driving. In conjunction in many cases, or certainly in coordination with the Army Corps, but where the city is actually leading the work, as it is with East Side Coastal Resilience, which is certainly underway, as you all know, and actually closer to completion than to initiation. Part of the reason to create a Bureau of Coastal Resilience is that we expect the city's portfolio of projects like that only to grow. And we've had some very promising conversations with the Army Corps about new models of project delivery that they are empowered to explore that might allow us to do even more of that in conjunction with the Army Corps. Specifically with respect to the HAT study, the Army Corps has not yet released its decision on they had put out the recommended alternative, which is primarily around landside barriers with a number of tidal barriers at specific water bodies like Jamaica Bay, Flushing Bay, Kill Van Kull, et cetera. I believe they received something like 6,000 comments, far more than they'd ever done for any project. And I think to their credit, the Army Corps has been very communicative with us and with the two states that are its partners. I don't have anything to say on where that process is heading right now. I believe the Army Corps may be here. They can speak for themselves. But I have to say, I think it's going well. The sad reality is those are some of the most long-term projects you can imagine. Right. That is the work of decades and not years, which is why, again, it becomes so important for us to think about the things we can do that complement that in the near term. But Elijah, maybe you could talk about the status of some of the specific projects we've got.
Just adding to...
Also, greetings to your first appearance for the committee, and we all congratulate you on your new position and wish you well.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and as a native New Yorker and someone who's been in government for over a decade.
That's where the fun stops, by the way. You're like gonna get it.
We, building off what Rit is saying with our collaboration with the Army Corps, they're in a process of understanding and responding to all of the feedback they received from the city. But I wanted to focus that our feedback was about making sure that their approach covers multiple hazards and multiple climate risks, that they focus on environmental justice communities, that they prioritize community engagement and outreach as they move forward in their process, and that they expedite project delivery as much as possible so that we can see results from their process and work with them to deliver these projects as soon as we can. So there's a ton of collaboration happening with the Corps as well as with other city agencies on our coastal resilience portfolio of projects. There are some that we're more familiar with, like East Side Coastal Resilience. There are others that are under construction, like the Battery Coastal Resilience Project, Brooklyn Bridge Montgomery Coastal Resilience Projects, which there are shovels in the ground. There are also groundbreakings that happened recently at Battery Park City. And then there's other coastal resilience projects and plans happening in Coney Island and Red Hook and other neighborhoods where we're raising the shorelines and street ends to have more protection from those coastal storm surges. And then we also have the Climate Strong Communities process, which is the process by which we are developing a pipeline of projects, building off the neighborhoods that were impacted during Sandy, but really thinking about what's next. And I know that there were questions about the prioritization of the projects that are there and what our selection criteria were for that work. And we are focused on the communities that are identified as environmental justice communities. We're focused on areas that are going to be receiving multiple hazards and multiple climate threats. And we're also looking at the areas where it's really going to be possible for a city-led adaptation project to make a difference within that neighborhood. So we're excited to work with you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have many more questions, but I'm going to be here all day. I'm very eager to hear from my esteemed co-chair and all the members of my committee and his committee who are here. So I'm going to cut off my questioning for now. Recognize my great co-chair and hear from other members who have a lot of value added. But I will just make a note to staff of my committee that I would like to make arrangements for a briefing with Elijah to find out everything that's really going on regarding storm surge. That's what kind of keeps me up at night. And so if that's a note to staff, if we can get that arranged, that would be great, okay?
Certainly.
And with that, I recognize my esteemed co-chair.
Thank you so
You got
Prepared.
Thank you so much, Chair Gennaro, and thank you for your questions too. Before I get started with my questions, I did want to recognize that we've been joined by a special guest, someone I met with earlier, Mayor Nagesh Koirala from Biratnagar, Nepal, who's here. We met earlier today in my office. Biratnagar, Mayor Koirala is the son of the Koirala family, which was instrumental in bringing democracy to Nepal. And one of the reasons why he's here for this hearing is because one of his priorities in Biratnagar, Nepal, is to focus on building a wastewater treatment plant because in Nepal, they're also addressing the serious issue of their streets flooding because of the monsoons. So thank you so much, Mayor Koirala, for joining us. It's an honor to have you here. And as the mayor and I have talked about, as we all know, the climate crisis is an international crisis affecting all of our countries in different ways. And so I look forward to ways that we can collaborate both here in the city and globally, all of us as citizens, to address this issue of the climate crisis facing our world.
And I just want to make a note to my staff, the next time we have a hearing, we got to bring somebody too.
Set the bar high on this one. We went international here. But thank you so much to our panel of commissioners, assistant commissioners who are here today. We appreciate your testimony very much and the work that you're doing in our city when it comes to resilience work. We appreciate also that the testimony, Commissioner Agarwal, is so long because you had a 5,000-word testimony set to go because of all the work that you all are doing, and that's the kind of thing we'd like to hear given the magnitude of what we're facing. I just have a few questions myself before turning it over to colleagues. I did want to focus, Assistant Commissioner, on our parks and how our parks are a critical piece of our climate resiliency work as well. So just, before focusing on other areas, I did mention in my opening statement the importance of our tree canopy as part of our the fight against climate change too. And so one question I had was, given the legislation we've passed, given the goal that I believe is critical of getting to a 30% tree canopy cover by 2035, how has Parks approached and thought about addressing and increasing tree plantings in our tree canopy, particularly in areas that desperately need it and lack it?
Thank you for the question. I definitely appreciate, and Parks greatly appreciates the support and emphasis on protecting the city's tree canopy, and it's obviously a major focus of our agency. With respect to some of the questions that we've received both in advance of the hearing and in the context of some of the bills that are proposed, just wanted to reiterate that our tree planting efforts continue to prioritize areas defined as highly heat vulnerable by the Department of Health's heat vulnerability index and the factors that go into the development of this index. So that continues to be the focus area. I'm not going to speak in detail to our tree planting priorities and the testimony that's probably been given in the last hearing. That's not my area of expertise, and I'm glad to take back any specific questions to our colleagues, my counterparts in the Forestry Division in particular. But that the rollout of our tree planting efforts, both in the right-of-way and in our natural areas, continues to be a main focus. As you may have heard, we've been very successful, not as successful as we wanted to be, but pretty successful in getting federal funding through the IRA for our tree planting efforts, in particular in natural areas. We received $10 million through the program of urban and community forestry just announced last month. And in addition, we received $5 million to focus on urban tree care and stewardship and planting in, again, in some of our priority environmental justice areas. So that continues to be our focus, and we are looking at creative ways to bring more federal funding into that effort.
Absolutely, and I've very much appreciated Parks' efforts in that regard too, and the work that we've done together with Majority Leader Schumer as well to make sure that it's communities that particularly lack tree canopy coverage that are prioritized when it comes to IRA funding that our city has received. So thank you for Parks' leadership on that front. Going to the federal grant programs in particular, because I think one of the biggest things that we keep coming back to is we need more investments in our communities, in this area in particular too. And so one thing I wanted to ask was, how will the city ensure that it gets its fair share of funding from the New York State Environmental Bond Act?
Thank you for the question and highlighting the importance of the Bond Act, which we're very much aware of and have been eagerly awaiting information about for the last many years. We are taking the way in which we're preparing for the opportunity to apply is to be meeting with our state DEP counterparts that can give us any insight into the focus of the opportunities. In particular, in the last month, we submitted probably about 15 potential projects through their survey opportunity so that we could get feedback on what kinds of projects they might be receptive to funding. We also have focused very much on identifying some of the constraints that might hinder us from being successful in those applications, some of which might relate to the time frame in which they would expect implementation. We've heard today about some of our challenges in procurement and our overall capital design schedules, and we want to be competitive with upstate in any capital programs, for example, that we would apply for. So it's very much on our mind, looking at what successful projects could be.
And if you all aren't able to receive that funding for whatever reason, or there's other, we don't get more through the IRA, for example, what are the contingency plans in place for the city to still access funds that would be needed for these resiliency programs?
Thank you for the question. That's focusing on funding, obviously very critical. We, in some ways, our mindset is always to be maybe scrappy and really pursue all the opportunities that we can. We're continuing to explore grant opportunities, specifically through the Deputy Mayor's Grants Task Force. That's been a way in which we are sharing information across city agencies about opportunities. We're continuing to pursue grant opportunities from federal agencies like NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We've done that for years and continue to do so, as well as pursue opportunities from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They've funded many of our projects that have contributed to us understanding the conditions, in particular, of our wetlands over the last 10 years. We've are continuing to look at other state programs that have always, well, for decades, really funded projects, both capital projects and stewardship and job training projects. So we can provide you, just to give you a more thorough understanding of what we've accomplished in the last 10 years, what those lists of grants are, and what we have coming down the pike. But we continue to actively pursue that and have, at any given time, more than a dozen projects that are grant funded and more than a dozen that we're pursuing on that scale.
Sure. Commissioner?
Just to clarify, were you focused on resilience projects in parks or more generic?
Parks in particular with my question, but also if you do have any comments on resiliency projects in general too, very happy to hear about those.
I'll just reiterate that when we don't get federal money, either we have to take money out of city tax levy for things like coastal resilience currently, or for stormwater projects, we have to raise the water rate.
Got it. Thank you. Now, going back to parks a bit, one of the things that I just have a few more questions, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. One was, on September 29th, when the storm happened, and one thing that really struck me, both in walking my kids to school and seeing the extent of flooding that morning, and then over the course of the day, was I maintained that our parks and tree canopy have such an essential role to play in absorbing stormwater, in incorporating green infrastructure to assist with the issue of major flooding that we've seen with this storm, with Ida before, my district in particular, Queens Boulevard, places like that were extraordinarily flooded, could really benefit from more creative infrastructure from parks and otherwise to address the flooding that we see in the rain. So I'm just curious, since this is our first time talking since that storm, how has Parks thought about not so much its response, yes, but also proactively looking into the future, prospectively, what thoughts have you all had about how parks could play a role in addressing this issue and protecting us from the next climate emergency? What was your thinking before? How has it changed? What other measures do you all see as critical that could be implemented now when the next storm comes, which it will?
Thank you for the question. We are, in some ways, always looking at stormwater response throughout our parks system, and both incorporating green and gray infrastructure. So I'll go back to just focusing on, for a minute, the kinds of formal green infrastructure that collaboration that we've had with DEP, and then just mention some of our other approaches. So we've worked with DEP on expanding green infrastructure for stormwater capture since 2011, and are continuing to sort of bolster that program both through retrofits in our parks to capture both the impervious area within our parks property as well as impervious area on the street through a number of programs retrofitting parks, adding green infrastructure components into new park projects, and pursuing grants to expand our ability to do more creative green infrastructure projects. We've got, for example, a number of projects in Staten Island that wouldn't have otherwise come under other funding programs, so that we can expand our own ability within our design and construction teams to implement projects that capture stormwater from our own assets as well as from the streets. So that continues to be a big focus. We've got dozens moving towards hundreds of projects that are in design and that will come online over the next several years. So with that rollout of programs, we are always increasing our capacity and ability to be creative, to speak to that component. And I think you'll see in the testimony that there are a number of types of programs that we're, of course, partnering on with DEP, whether it's cloudburst programs that happen in parks or Blue Belt programs. That to speak to some of our other elements of attention to having resilient parks, I mean, that's part of the reason we pay such close attention to the type of tree planting we do, how we do it, doing it right, but whether both on the street or in the natural areas, and increasingly with, over the last 10 years, an understanding of the climate change and the likelihood of having more resilient species coming from the south. We're actually looking very carefully at our plant palette. And so that's an ongoing effort. It's not something that we're suddenly thinking about, since last week or even since Ida. And then lastly, I'll just say that it's particularly important that we understand the critical aspect of maintenance, whether it's maintaining the vegetation, maintaining rain gardens, ability to clean out catch basins after a storm, but it goes back to being able to do and have the resources to do the work on the ground to make sure these green infrastructure systems are ready for the next storm.
Thank you, and I just urge you all to really to keep that planning going, because there's far more we have to do on that front to think of our parks, as fortifications against climate change. So I'm heartened to hear the efforts and encourage them to keep going. My final question is, and really for both Parks and DEP is, we're talking about all these issues that are so crucial, measures that need to be implemented, requiring funding from all different levels of government. And we couldn't agree more with that. At the same time, we're looking at an administration that's proposing drastic pegs that will cut from the very types of work and services, including these, that we need to fortify our cities. So my question for you all is, how will the recently announced hiring freeze, the PREG proposals phased in 3 times over the next year by the mayor, disrupt the city's climate resiliency projects?
Well, so let me start by saying, at least insofar as DEP is concerned, the water utility portion of DEP's budget, which is a little more than 90% of our budget and includes all of the stormwater and sewer work, is not subject to the PEG. We are subject to the OTPS freeze and we are subject to the hiring freeze, but we're not subject to the PEG. And of course, we are doing everything we possibly can to ensure that none of our services are hurt or slowed down by that, but we are working through the 2 freezes that we are subject to.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I just add that there's a disconnect there between the work that you all need to be doing and are doing, and getting the appropriate funding from our own city government to do so. If we expect the federal government and the states to step in, then our city needs to be the first mover to act and put that funding in, especially when it comes to resiliency projects. For parks, I'd ask the same question of you as well, Assistant Commissioner, and with really a focus on for parks, you mentioned maintenance and how important that is too. So how would these pegs, how are you all thinking about these pegs? How will they affect maintenance and operations, especially for parks that are smaller and don't have the private conservancy resources that depend on city funding?
Well, I'm actually not prepared to answer that, and I think as an agency, I don't think we're quite ready yet either. We'll be working with OMB and working with our budget office to identify how to best respond. So we're committed to maintaining the parks at a standard that we've always held, and I'll continue to do so, but we won't have any specific response until the November plan comes out, and at that time.
Sure, thank you.
Yes.
And I would just add, again, we're in a conversation about cutting from parks and green spaces that are crucial for our health, crucial for our climate. The conversation should really be about how to increase resources for our Parks Department. And so to see PEGs being proposed by this administration that will give you all fewer resources to maintain our green spaces, fewer resources to make our parks more resilient in the face of a worsening climate crisis, worsening floods, is shocking and doesn't comport with the work that we know needs to be done to actually invest in our park system. On that note, I'll turn it over now for questions from our colleagues. The first one is Councilmember Brooks Powers.
Thank you, chairs, and thank you, Commissioner, for your remarks. As you know, in my district last week, we saw flooding due to mesh that was left on top of catch basins on construction corridors, but that mesh was unfortunately not removed prior to the flooding at these locations. How is DEP addressing this issue in advance of future floodings? Also, how frequently does DEP clean catch basins? Can you walk through what the protocols are in place to ensure catch basins receive the necessary maintenance and cleaning? And finally, in 2018, the mayor made a commitment of $2 billion towards improving sewer infrastructure in Southeast Queens neighborhoods. Can you provide an update on the progress of that project? And is there any plans on expediting that particular project? Because we see these now frequent weather events happening where not only the places that have been queued up for or that have historically received flooding, we're seeing new parts of Queens that are receiving flooding as well. And I know I said that was last, but the last is in the Arvern community along Beach 67th Street. DEP came in and thankfully put infrastructure in that was supposed to suck up the water from these weather events and to help prevent the flooding. Unfortunately, the way it was built, the pitch has created a dynamic where along Thursby Basin, Thursby and Beach 67th, there has been a lot of flooding going into the homes. We saw that in Winter Storm Elliott in December. We saw that again last week with the rainwater. It doesn't even really take those weather events. If we have high tide, if there's light rain, we are still seeing it. So can DEP come back, revisit that site, and do the necessary work to address that project that took place that now is impacting over a dozen homes along that strip?
Thank you, Council Member. I'll try to tackle these in reverse order. Regarding the specific project in Arvern, of course, we'll have somebody come take a look. I'm not going to commit we can fix it until we know what we think is going on, but we will certainly work with your office.
Well, the challenge is some of those homes, even before, they didn't get the level of flooding they've gotten now. Mm-hmm. And the contractors that did it had acknowledged to some of the homeowners that it was not, when they look back after the fact, that it's not pitched correctly.
Huh. Okay. Well, we will, as I said, we'll look into that particular site. In terms of Southeast Queens, the work is proceeding. I think, as I was saying in my statement, we are thinking broadly about how we can expand and accelerate stormwater management work across the city. So we don't have any specific plans right now to accelerate the work specifically going on in Southeast Queens, but that is in the budget. It is in the budget for all of the next 10 years, so that work is slated to continue on.
I'm sorry,
a
to
phase.
that point, what will the city be doing in the meantime? Because we have homeowners that are being flooded, we have people who live in the basement in those areas, we have high water tables. Literally, one of my residents in my district woke up by standing up off her bed to get ready for work, only to find that her feet was covered with water. So as they wait for this construction project to take place, what is the city doing to make sure that we are mitigating the flooding that's taking place?
Well, Councilmember, look, as I said, the reality is these are long-term projects, right? There is no amount of desire on our part could accelerate all of those projects at once. It's one of the reasons that we started last year, only a couple of months after this administration took office, Rainfall Ready, which is really, as I have characterized it, it's the Band-Aid. A Band-Aid is what you put on a wound while nature slowly heals the wound, but you protect it from getting worse, right? And so what that includes, for example, is the distribution of flood barriers, which are not a unique technology. You can buy them at Home Depot. We give them out, in part to help people, in part to make sure people know that technology exists. So people who have particular flooding issues through their driveway, through a front door, you basically, it's like a sandbag that's easier to store because you can empty the water out and refill it in advance of the flood.
And we thank you for it. You did give that to my district as well as some pumps, and we are appreciative of that.
The sump pumps that we've started distributing in certain circumstances. We have flood alarms, so just like you have a smoke alarm, we would encourage anybody who lives in a basement apartment, you can get a flood sensor so that your constituent wouldn't have woken up with the surprise. She would have heard the alarm to let her know when flooding is starting. Pursuant to a local law, my agency is working now on a study around backwater preventers. So that is, I will have more to say in a couple of months on that score, certainly before the end of the year. So there are a number of things. And finally, of course, it's about getting flood insurance, which I know is a financial challenge to some. But nonetheless, it is just a reality that the city is not going to be able to protect everybody in the near term. We are working as hard as we can to develop a comprehensive approach, but it will take time. There is no way around it. You asked
Sorry.
about catch basin. Oh,
One point on that, there are some homeowners or residents that have flood insurance and were told by their insurance carrier that they would not be covering it.
well, that is something that I think perhaps we should have a follow-on conversation about. We have heard of complaints like that, and of course it is the state that deals with enforcing good behavior among insurance companies, but I think that's something I'd be happy to talk with you and your staff about.
Thank you.
You asked about catch basin cleaning. So at the beginning of last fiscal year, so last summer, DEP implemented something I think is really very good, which is a risk-based approach to catch basin inspections and cleanings. So rather than treating all 160,000 of our catch basins as equally likely to get clogged or equally impactful if they do get clogged, we actually developed a risk assessment. So some catch basins that are on high-traffic streets or near a subway station or something, so we think they might be likely to get clogged very quickly, or they would be really impactful if they flood. They are actually getting checked every 6 months. Others that are, for location reasons or others, less likely to get clogged or less impactful if they do, are on a 3-year cycle. That's a way that we optimize the impact of the labor hours that it takes physically to go around and check these. In advance of a storm, so whenever the flash flood program is activated, there are about 2,000 high priority catch basins that are allocated among DEP, DOT, and sanitation. And so when the flash flood program is activated by the Office of Emergency Management, as it was on Thursday morning, the 28th, actually pretty early, I think 8 a.m., crews go out and check those high priority locations, and to the extent that it's possible, we will go and clean them if they are clogged. one of the things that I think we are always eager to remind people of is there is a difference between clogging and covering, right? So if a catch basin fills up with material, the top has to be opened up, it has to get scooped out. That requires a special truck. Only DEP can do that. What often happens, especially in the middle of a storm, and I know of several places in the city where this happened on the 29th, that when the rain started, sanitation street sweepers had done their job, the catch basins were fine. All of that water, especially during the autumn, brings leaves, covers over, mats over the catch basins, and then you start getting flooding. Of course, when we find out about that, we do dispatch crews in the middle of a storm, as long as it's safe, and immediately right after, to clear those spaces. But I also know of several instances, and maybe even one or two people here, who went out in the middle of the storm, identified locations like that. All it takes is a rake. And I think one opportunity we may have is to think about how we get New Yorkers to do that kind of work. That the reality is there is no way with massive increases in resources that DEP could respond in real time to 160,000 catch basins around the city. So I think there is something around a distributed response. And then you mentioned the meshes, which you and I spoke about the weekend of the 30th, 31st. Those construction meshes, and this is actually a kind of a lining that basically prevents grit from going into the catch basins. It's particularly, I believe, required in the separately sewered areas of the city, including your district. And it is actually a state DEC requirement for construction. So our plan is actually we need to talk to DEC because one of the things that we think is probably necessary is a requirement on their part that the construction contracts include a commitment by the contractor when there is a flash flood warning to remove those meshes. It is not something that DEP installs. It's not even something that DEP mandates. It is actually a state item. So we will talk to them.
Thank you for that, and thank you, chairs.
Thank you. Thank you, Council Member. We're joined by Council Member Narcisse. Happy to have her here with us. And I recognize Council Member Nurse for questions. We didn't start the clock right away for the last, so yeah, there was extra time there, but it's a majority whip. So,
Thank you, Chair.
Come on, and we recognize Councilmember Nurse for questions.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, congratulations and welcome. I want to thank you, Commissioner, for just the proactive communications you've had, at least directly with me, with regards to heavy rain events in Bushwick, and just how available and accessible you have been to hear all of my gripes. And I do appreciate the short-term mitigation efforts that you all have been putting in the recurring areas that are getting hit in Bushwick. However, we're kind of, and I've said this at other hearings, we're just at this point where people are demanding answers. I'm aware of what you're saying because I'm here at these hearings. But I think at this point, what we're looking for is a timeline of when there will even be a proposal for what to do. And I don't know, it's hard to understand. I understand that each neighborhood that has this type of recurring flooding might have specific things that are unique to it, but Bushwick needs to know where we are in that pipeline. Are we neighborhood 20? Are we neighborhood 3? Is it in 2 years we will get a vision of a proposal? Just anything more concretely would be really helpful because we are the ones getting yelled at. We are the ones getting the brunt of the communications, and the answers are not easy to communicate. And so we need just a little more transparency in terms of where we are in these projects.
Excuse me. Council member, look, it's a very fair question. Certainly for your specific issue with the flooding on Knickerbocker that you and I have walked through, and We've spent a lot of time. There is active work going on right now around what the alternatives could be. So I think we would have more to share with your constituents certainly before the end of the year. I don't know if that includes a firm timetable, right? But we will certainly have more to say.
Will it include what all the options are?
Certainly, it will include the options that we are exploring.
Okay. Is there any funding dedicated specifically to addressing the flooding in Bushwick?
I think once we figure out exactly what the preferred option is, there is, so it was alluded to, I forget, in I think one of the chair's opening remarks, $2 billion that was set aside in the new normal report. That is a pool of money that we could potentially draw from. We will have to figure out where to pull that funding together from, but realistically, first we have to figure out what we're trying to do. For what it's worth, I'll say, in part because of our ability to have recourse to the water bill, and in part because DEP has focused so much on our ability to do procurement and deliver capital. Capital availability is not our main constraint. Our main constraint is much more around the ability to design these projects at once. I think you're all at the City Council familiar with the challenges that New York City has had in attracting and retaining civil engineers.
Yes.
Which is not just about the city. I hear that from every AE consultant out there, right? But that's one of our key bottlenecks.
Thank you for that. I do think that I would really recommend that the city, engage in louder outreach on communicating that the timelines are far, because, the water barriers are nice if you have a hose, but I'm not seeing them being used actively. We've given a lot away. We appreciate them, and it feels like something, but when it actually is happening in real time, it's not as effective. So I think we need to have more robust communications from the agencies or the administration, like, hey, we don't have answers for you for 2 to 3 years. And because people need to know that when they're investing in our communities, because it's not just, for us, it's not just Knickerbocker. We have public housing. We have, like a 10, 15 block radius where people are just, whole floors just useless. Okay, I'll move on. Another question I have is kind of in relation to the resolution. And I've asked about this a little bit before. Does DEP formally review land use or housing applications involving city subsidies that will be constructed within future high-risk flood zones?
I will need to see whether DEP has any role within that process. I believe that would be undertaken by city planning, but I would have to get back to you on that.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Nurse. Next up is Councilmember Carr.
Thank you, Chairs Gennaro and Krishnan, for this crucial hearing. Commissioner, and it's good to see you and your colleagues all here. I just want to start by thanking DEP for its transformational investments, whether it's the storm separate sewer infrastructure, replacing septic and combined sewer over the last 30 years, and of course, landmark Blue Belt investments that have been just transformational for my communities, even with current challenges. I just have 3 questions that I want to focus in on. The first is with respect to the seawall project. First forecasts were that it was going to start in 2018 and finish in 2021, and obviously that has been a mistake. And I know they're about to take over some Blue Belt creations from DEP near Father Capodanno, so I'd love to hear your perspective on where things are and what needs to happen for this to move forward. Additionally, I know that there is some Blue Belt project expansions contemplated for South Beach and Grasmere, but not yet in the capital plan. I know you talked about that in the round, but love to hear more specifics about, when that might come about. And then finally, with respect to the westerly Willowbrook Clove Lakes drainage study that's concluding this month and the options that are going to be presented from that, I'd love to know a timeline of when we could start to see a timeline for something, in particular for Horizon Village, which has been devastated twice in the last 20 years by storms. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Council Member. I apologize. I will have to get back to you on both Clove Lake and South Beach. I just don't have those timelines at my fingertips. I know, as you say, the Clove Lake study is winding down, but I have not been briefed on what it's going to say yet, so I don't have any sneak peek to offer. I'm sorry. But happy to give you one in private.
Sure.
On the South Shore seawall, that is something that has occupied a fair bit of my attention personally. I've spoken to Congresswoman Malliotakis about it personally. The DEC Commissioner Basil Sagos and I have convened a number of meetings with the Army Corps, with parks, with national parks. There are a number of agencies involved, which is part of the problem. Right, and I say that as an agency, so we are sometimes part of the problem as well, but the more agencies you have, especially the more levels of government, the more things drag on. The good news is the first phase really is on the verge of issuing a contract. Again, I believe we've got somebody from the Army Corps here, so I won't make news for them. You could ask them, but I will simply assure you that getting that project underway has occupied a lot of my attention, a lot of Commissioner Sagos's attention. I know Colonel Young at the, both Colonel Young and Colonel Lloyd have been personally involved at the Army Corps, so we are on it. What I will also say, and I think I have learned a great deal from the problems that project has faced as we should apply to the HAT study. Right, we need to think about the HATs as being the South Shore of Staten Island project times 30, right? And so we have had issues with hazardous waste, right? As you know, there's a site there that's got radioactive waste that New York City has not actually got a track record of doing cleanups for. So we are in a very thorny discussion with the federal and state governments about how to allocate responsibility for that. We've had a very big issue that has caused significant delays. And again, I think this is a situation in which everybody's been working hard and everybody's been working in good faith. But because the inland work is what's called a betterment, the city is going to pay for it, but also the city has to design it. We have actually spent more than 2 years going back and forth with us sending them drawings and them sending them back. And again, I don't mean to say this as an attack or a criticism on the Corps. I think they are working in good faith, but everybody does things slightly differently. So my agency has a really good track record of doing very big construction projects. We don't do our designs in exactly the same way as the Army Corps does. And so one of the things that was in, as Elijah alluded to, our recommendations and our input into the Army Corps' HAT study, and something, frankly, I've begun to talk to our congressional delegation about with respect to the upcoming Water Resources and Defense Authorization Act, which happens every 2 years in Congress, WRDA, is actually about expanding the mission of HATs so that not because we need the feds to pay more, I think New York City should pay its fair share, but because that division of design work is a killer. And if we think about HATs, which is going to have not only multi-climate hazards with inland flooding that it has to address, sunny day flooding that it's going to have to address from sea level rise, but also things like recreation, parks access to ferries, things like that. The HATs project is going to be some of the most complex waterfront work imaginable. And if we wind up in a situation in which there are multiple agencies trying to design it together, that is a recipe for delay that will add multiple decades to what is already a multiple decades program.
Thank you. Let's catch up offline about that. That's very important. Thank you, chairs.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Carr. I recognize Councilman Ressler for questions.
Thank you very much, Chair Gennaro. It's good to have you back, and thank you to you and Chair Krishnan for your leadership on this hearing. It could not be more pressing and important. And thank you to the administration officials for joining us today. I'd like to just begin by building off of Chair Krishnan's final comments about how we can anticipate these pegs to impact resiliency efforts across the city. Commissioner, do you think you can realistically achieve the kind of ambitions that you've set out with 15% pegs kind of over your head, and if the other panelists would like to comment on how devastating these draconian cuts would be on your ability to effectively do your work, we would welcome any insights that you have to offer.
Well, Councilmember, I'll just start by reiterating, because DEP's funding, and so the funding for stormwater is water utility, and we could save a ton of money and it still can't be used for other city purposes, of course. DEP has not been subject to the PEG, so stormwater resilience is not affected by the PEG. We are subject to the hiring freeze, and we are working with OMB in the hopes of getting exemptions from those, from the hiring freeze. And there is this process around OTPS spending that has been frozen. And so we're trying to figure out how to unfreeze key categories there.
Anything else you'd like to add about how you can navigate these extraordinary cuts?
Similar to what Parks also said, we're in the process with OMB and figuring this all out. So,
okay. I just want to be clear. Climate change remains the single greatest threat to the people of New York City. We have to be deepening these investments. The prospect that across the board deep cuts could impact our ability to make these necessary resiliency investments, and frankly, much, much more, is indefensible. And I greatly hope that the mayor and the OMB director will recognize that this is an area that must be spared from any potential cuts. Just building on Councilmember Nurse's line of questioning, similarly, I think we're looking for clarity on when we're going to see more comprehensive planning that can realistically provide protection for our communities. And my recollection is that Plan NYC requires, we're now calling it Plan NYC again? Is that so not Plan YC, Plan NYC?
Oh, I prefer Plan YC if you don't mind, but I
We've
also have
added
a
an
silent A
N.
at the end of my name.
I know the old OLTPS days, it was Plan YC. I just was unsure where we were. So under Plan YC, we'll go with that. DP's required to release a stormwater flooding adaptation plan by 2024. And want to understand, will this plan include target improvements for specific areas that the city knows well flood and flood consistently? What I certainly experience in Council District 33, which is Waterfront District, is that it's the areas that flood when it rains a little that are absolutely decimated when it rains a lot. And yet we don't see improvements. With all due respect, Commissioner, I adore your staff. I spend time and time again on the phone with them, looking at sites. They say they're going to make improvements. They're never adequate. And we continue to have enormous challenges. And I don't know if it's the reticence to take on big, lengthy capital projects that are obviously very costly, but we're not seeing the interventions that are needed in the places on Dean Street and Boerum Hill, on Throop and Wallabout and South Williamsburg, on Newell and Messerol and Greenpoint. I mean, these are the sites that everybody knows always flood. 4th Avenue along Carroll, where Shahan and I border, they flood constantly. And yet, I don't see anything getting better. How do we shift? How do we do better? Is that going to be laid out in this plan next year? How do I be a better advocate for my neighborhoods to actually see the investments that we need?
Well, look, Council Member, we have been, certainly for the last year and a half, or nearly 2 years now, we have been trying to shift gears at DEP to really focus on resilience as the driving force of a lot of our capital thinking. For example, we released the rainfall ready maps last summer. That was new, right? That was the result of a lot of work, some of it done at MOCEJ under the previous administration, but that was new. We are now in the process, among other things, of using those hotspots where we know there is flooding to guide our capital prioritization, right? That is not actually the way it had been done for generations at DEP. So, much like bringing kind of data-driven rationality to how we do catch basin inspections. We're beginning the process of bringing that kind of risk or impact prioritization to how we think about capital investments to address flooding. Among the big things that is just about ready, or we're beginning to use it now, but has been a major investment over the last year or two, is building what we call an all pipes model. So we now have, I won't call it a digital twin, it's not quite that fancy, but really for the first time we now have a model of how all of the sewers interconnect. That's really important because what we know, first of all, it's all interconnected. And so among the things that we are now just at the early stages of being able to do is understand, well, if there's flooding down here, the fastest, most cost-effective way to address it might not be there. It might be upstream because all the water up here is flowing down here. It may also be that if there's flooding up here, the real problem is a bottleneck down here. We now have the ability to really understand that. And one of the things that I think we are coming to terms with as an agency is the fact that until the weather started changing a couple of years ago, we didn't need to worry about this that much. We just didn't have to understand it, right? And now we do. And so we are building the infrastructure so that we can do that kind of rational planning. Yes, we are working towards a comprehensive strategy. I am not yet able to tell you how detailed or specific that will be. What I can tell you is that we are working on it with a large team, with a lot of inter-bureau and, in fact, interagency work going on. It is something that is one of my top priorities. It is not coincidental that the mayor asked me to be Chief Climate Officer and Commissioner at DEP at the same time. It's precisely to make sure that we are fully integrating DEP into this. And, of course, we will be standing up this Bureau of Coastal Resilience, in part because one of the things we've realized, and not realized, but one of the things we are acting on, is the reality that the first place that tidal flows go is down the drain. And one of the things which we certainly saw on the 29th, one of the issues that caused even more flooding than that massive rainstorm, the second most intense rainstorm in the city's recorded history brought us, was the fact that the hour of most intense rain from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. unfortunately took place at high tide. And so we had a number of parts of the city where our outflows, which otherwise would have drained water out of the city into the harbor, actually were backed up because the tide had risen so high that they were covered over. So among the things we have to work on is, and I'm sorry, Chair, but I want to give a complete answer. I swore to give a complete answer.
He's given me a hard time. I thought that Chair Krishnan promised me double the time today. I must have misunderstood.
But among the things that we are working on is how to accelerate the tide gates so that we can prevent flooding from occurring because water is backing up, which is something, for example, that happens regularly, unfortunately, in the Rockaways.
Look, and this is interconnected to some of the proposals that were included in the HAT study. I will just say, I appreciated the Army Corps engaging with us as communities across the city in a quite open and thoughtful way. I could never understand what the city's position was throughout this process. And so I struggled to understand what the city was advocating for. My community was organized. We were very concerned about 15-foot walls that would create a bathtub effect and cut our communities off from our waterfronts. But I'd really like to better understand, and maybe with new leadership, we can have those conversations in the mayor's office to have clarity on what you're all advocating for. And I'll just say in closing, because I've gone over time, in part because you gave such a thoughtful and lengthy response, I appreciate a data-driven approach to identifying where we need to make the capital improvements to improve our sewer infrastructure. I don't have the data, but I know the lived experience of my neighbors, and I can tell you the places in my community that are hit time and again. And we will provide that list once again to DEP and be the squeakiest wheel that I know how to be. But we desperately want to see attention and intervention in these sites that are problematic sites. So look for an email from me very shortly, but hope we can work together to make some improvements in our waterfront district. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Councilmember Ressler. A lot of leeway there on that one. Councilmember Holden?
Thank you, chairs. And I want a Lincoln Wrestler time also, because I get,
Man, once you start, slippery slope.
I'm on both committees, so we should get extra time. Thank you, chairs, and thank you, Commissioner. Two questions regarding stormwater runoff. One problem. I have a lot of utility work in my district, many blocks, and I brought this up to DEP many times, especially National Grid. They're replacing gas lines on the sidewalk. When they restore the sidewalk, they pave the whole thing, including the strip that's not the property owner's space, that's the city's space. Used to be a grass strip, now we have concrete, which is counterproductive if we're doing, you know, the bioswales or the rain gardens, and then we're paving over blocks and blocks in districts around Queens and throughout the city. That's one. Where I do have pending legislation that would actually define that space, that you can't pave over it. It hasn't been drafted yet. I'm waiting several weeks or months, but I think that could be part of your plan to mitigate some of the, because obviously the stormwater runoff that we're experiencing now, in my district, it goes into the Newtown Creek. And we know what that's like. The Newtown Creek is another story. But the second thing, the Yards Text Amendment of 2008 that this council passed, it's really not being enforced properly by DOB. I see every construction project in my district, almost every one of them I have to address. Meaning somebody's not paying attention at DOB. If they're permitting this, you know, they're allowing it. I send inspectors down there from DOB, and most of the time, they come back and say they didn't find anything wrong. And I know this, so I have to send another inspector, and depending on which DOB inspector they send, I get lucky sometimes. Most of the time, I'm spinning my wheels. That means, and this is, by the way, there's been articles about this since 2008 about how the DOB is not really enforcing it. So we need to pull all this together. My question would be, number one, on the Yards Text Amendment, can DEP actually help out and kind of guide DOB? Because I don't know, again, if they're really educating their inspectors properly. And I'll speak to the commissioner of DOB also, but question one would be, would you get involved in that and helping? Because that, I'm telling you, almost every project that I'm seeing in my district, they're paving over because they want to park more cars, and they're putting in everywhere. They're putting in their cars in front of their stoops, in their doorways, which I'm trying to get, you know, DOB to enforce that. That's almost impossible. And I'm actually reaching out to the fire department because that seems to be, you're blocking egress, you know. So all these questions, we need help from your agent or somebody's help on this.
Thank you, Council Member. Look, I will, so the issue of the text amendment enforcement is something that I certainly know is a challenge. I think it is worth having a conversation that I would be happy to engage with Commissioner Otto about in terms of how we think perhaps differently about enforcement. I don't know whether that would require a legislative change or an interagency agreement. We would need to think about how we resource something like that, because you know, I think one of the things, frankly, that tends to happen is that we assign tasks based on who has resources or who has expertise, as opposed to which agency is really focused on ensuring that a bad thing doesn't happen. And there may need to be some realignment there.
But just on dealing with inspectors that don't know the law, that's one thing. It's another thing, because I'm always talking to homeowners and they're complaining they're getting flooded. Their sewers are backing up. And I said, well, look at your neighbors. I said, part of the problem is if you look at even your property, you've paved over 90 or 100% of your yard. And that's causing it. Well, no, I said it's overdevelopment, but we're concreting everything. We're cementing grass. But when the city actually does it, when the city participates in that, like I mentioned about the grass strip, it may not seem like a lot, but when you look at entire blocks of my district, and I photographed this, and I did give it to DEP, I said, let's do something about this. Let's stop doing this. Let's put more grass, and again, if it takes legislation, I'll do it. However, it shouldn't really. Because it's not really the property owner's space. Most of the properties, it ends at the sidewalk, and then you have that strip of, it could be 4 feet, it could be more in certain areas. So if we can coordinate that, and kind of quickly, because they're replacing, miles and miles every day, and it's National Grid and Con Ed that are doing it. And each time I talk to them, they say, we don't know anything about that. We'll pave, and they're paving it. And it's not their property. It's the city's property. But we can control that. Thanks.
And I just want to jump in for a second. I just want to give Bob a little latitude because this is an important question, and I think we all see it. And so I'm going to give him a little latitude here. And he also sits next to me at the council, so,
Yeah, I could harass you sometimes on that.
So,
but no, this is important.
So, Rick, take as long as you want to give an answer to that.
Well, look, on this one, I will confess it's not something that I have an answer to off the top of my head, but I'm happy to work with you. It's something that I've heard in the past. How we enforce construction rules across the city, frankly, we mention it in Plan YC as something that we've got to have happen. It's something that is part of the City of Yes for carbon neutrality that's, I believe, coming before the City Council very soon. But on the specific issue of what Con Ed and National Grid might be doing on the sidewalks, I will follow up with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Councilmember Holden. I recognize Councilmember Velasquez.
Hi, and thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for your work. So listening to my colleagues and their questioning, I can't help but ask you, a lot of these would be facilitated better with borough commissioners, and so why hasn't DEP hired any borough commissioners yet?
Well, thank you, Council Member. So the position of borough commissioners was actually legislated by the City Council, I believe, 2 years ago. So we have been in the process of getting ready and hiring and recruiting, and with the hiring freeze, we're a little bit stuck right now, but I'm hoping to work through that, because I agree with you. Among the themes that we've heard here is better communication, and that is something that I have my Deputy Commissioner for Public Affairs and Communications who's been doing a great job, but is trying to build her team, and we could use those extra resources.
Do we expect that to be done within this calendar year, or?
Again, there's the hiring freeze right now, and OMB is working through the exception requests, and I don't have a timeline I can give you right now.
Perfect, thank you for that. You had mentioned earlier the DEP risk assessment. Is there a way that we as council members can get what that looks like in our district? I know certain parts of my district, every single time that there is flooding, and you've seen it, not just the flooding, but also the sinkholes that happen afterwards, specifically in my district because of the construction in the 20s. Is there a way to get that information to us?
Well, one of the things that again, with a more structured approach to outreach that I would love to be able to do is ensure that, and Councilmember Ressler's question kind of incorporated this, ensure that our rainfall ready map that we're really relying on incorporates all of the kind of lived experience out there. I've been very pleased when I go out, as I did with you in your district and with others and across the city, and we talk to constituents who have experienced flooding. Our map is usually accurate, but it's not 100% necessarily, and before we make decisions on it, we'd like to incorporate all of that. I would like to do that in a systematic way. We haven't started that yet, and I think, frankly, It's kind of just how we sequence the work. I really cannot stress enough how daunting the challenge of the city's stormwater management is. It is a breathtakingly complex system. And so right now we've prioritized looking at a number of a very finite number, I will point out, number of locations that we think typify the kind of problems that we see much more broadly around the city, to identify how some of the solutions might work, so that we can figure out by extrapolation what would a citywide response actually involve. That's really step one, which is in part why I, frankly had to hedge a little bit with Councilmember Ressler's question, because I don't know how precise next year's plan is going to be, but it is certainly going to be a step in the right direction.
I appreciate that, because I have so many local groups who are willing and able to come and help with the cleaning, at least, of the catch basins on the surface area. And so if we can just find those areas that we need to target, especially on days that we know are going to be significant, with significant rainfall, then we want to be ready as well. And if we can just target those areas as a community, we can actually spare a lot of the work that you guys would have to do as well. So that way, we got to work together, and this is a pathway to that. You had mentioned flood alarms as a recommendation to Councilmember Brooks Powers. Is there an opportunity there to launch a citywide program to cover for families that have a significant low-income bracket, to where we're actually saving their lives? Do you see a benefit for this?
Well, so the good news is these are not very expensive devices, right? I don't have a number off the top of my head, but we're not talking about a $50 or $100 item. And DEP has some that we are very happy to give away. We haven't done that in a systematic citywide way, but it is something worth exploring.
All right, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thanks so much, Councilmember. And now we have Councilmember Narcisse.
Thank you, chairs. Good afternoon, everyone. And by the way, you're one of the important agency in my life, because I represent the 46th district. It's been a problem for us, even worse ever since Sandy. Every little rain, all the calls that I'm getting, and usually I have to be on the street riding the storm to go around and visit folks in my district, which is Garrison Beach, Bergen Beach, Canarsie, Mill Basin area. So you know where I'm talking about, right? So in my district, it's every day that when I see rain, I have to cross my little finger. So what can we do? What's in plan to ease our pain in this district? Because we're talking about sewage backup. I witnessed feces coming to people's home. So I'm wondering where we at. And before we get to that answer, we have infrastructure money out there from the federal level. How many proposals that you have forth in front of the federal to make sure that we get our fair share in the city of New York?
I will ask Elijah to give you some of the numbers around federal, but let me take a couple of, as I said earlier, one of our challenges with federal money is, and frankly, I've had this conversation with a number of members of our congressional delegation, is that they believe that, well, if New York City is going to get X, or New York State's going to get community development block grant money, that we've been, that we get by formula, what CDBG resilience money is going to be invested. And we have been very successful facilities. So that's been very successful. I'll see if we can get back to you either right now or later with a number on government has a competitive program that they are huge amount of water infrastructure money federal government that the state has determined New York City should not have access are by water infrastructure, which I think is unfair. We have maximize federal money, and I think where the deck is not stacked against. You asked about.
I want to know, are there any
to know where these things are happening. Done a pretty good job over the last decade of reducing. We have fewer than half as many sewer backups as we did. It's still too many. One of is that actually more than half of the sewer backups that are not due to what's going on. So when a sewer backup is reported, costs a significant amount of time and money. Causing their own sewer backups, because what we see is a lot of situations in which the rain gutter that line, and in a major rainstorm like we that kind of pressure behind the sewer is actually liable to cause to the home. And I think to the home. And I think backup complaints where we send a truck, there is no evidence backed up, so there should not have been a sewer backup because you've got a rain gutter parts of your district. or put a rain barrel underneath it, and then you've got the benefit of as the rain barrel is designed to do.
And Chair, I know I'm pushing it, but I heard about 160,000 catch basin throughout the city, and you have about 2,000 that's kind of like a high priority area. So do you have a list of where the high priority areas are? And in the catch basin, water flooding, because if you want to check flooding, if you want to check calling me left and right, I cannot sleep when it's heavy rain. So when it's a storm, forget it. So I need your help, Commissioner. I don't want to squeeze because I run out of my time, but I need your help in my district.
I'd be happy to.
But I need your help in my district.
I'd be happy to.
But I need your help in my
I'd be
district.
happy to.
Agencies like EPA, NOAA, FEMA, through the brick. Which we're specifically targeting that work. An application to get more resources.
I appreciate you, and I'm hoping so we can do some seminars together. Something got to be done because those people actually are in needs. Because, like I said, last week again, I had to go all over Garrison Beach and seeing people's houses under the flood. That's unfair. And having the backups from the sewage system. That's from the sewage system. That's
the speed of projects and
I guess the way I see it, our challenge is not wanting to do the right thing. It is not even a lack of capital, because once we have the projects identified, I have a $31 billion 10-year capital plan at DEP. Capital is not really the main constraint if we choose to prioritize. I mean, I don't think we've had a lot of instances where or Blue Belt or cloudburst projects have been delayed. You know, in the popular imagination, there's a lot that we blame environmental impact statements on for, which is not necessarily the issue here. I'm just pointing out. I'm just pointing out. Where's the 22nd project? It's how do we push all of them through the pipeline as quickly as possible? Some of that is just about having really good management, and I could not be more proud of the work that my agency has done in terms of managing its procurement, good management internally.
Right.
But there are ways that the city does procure. It is, and obviously, you know, we have to
We can certainly brainstorm about this over our next forward since. And you know, the first
Just to reiterate, I think what really was a building off almost 10 years of work after that was inspired and included and identified in the wetlands strategy that we then used as the foundation for the further roadmap focusing on New York City parks wetlands in the wetlands management framework. So I will just wanted to highlight that many of the recommendations and including addressing the need to develop better wetlands map were something that we continued to work on through getting US EPA funding in numerous numerous
Like I said, I got Robert texting. That's
Absolutely,
fine.
yeah.
Okay, I certainly appreciate that. And to close out this panel, my esteemed co-chair, my esteemed co-chair, my esteemed co-chair, my esteemed co-chair.
Much, Chair Gennaro. Actually, before I go with my closing questions, we have been joined by Councilmember Gutierrez, who I think has a
construction of the actual development, which is in any of the buildings. And I really think it's, I don't know what the exact terminology is, but like kind of where it is, they're around Borinquen it floods, but the actual buildings flood. And so every single lobby, even if it's not even a cloudburst, will flood. And so I'm curious, what is the communication with NYCHA like? What is something that I can do in this instance? I can do in this instance. I can do in this instance. I can do in this instance. So I'm just curious what your communication with NYCHA looks like overall, and some of these what your communication with NYCHA looks like overall, and some of these some of the things that I can be elevating, because it is a problem. And some of these, I mean, I represent Williamsburg Houses. It's the oldest development in Brooklyn. Oldest development in Brooklyn. Oldest development in Brooklyn. Oldest development in Brooklyn.
About resilience. As with everything at NYCHA, the resources are always far short of the actual need, but I think overall, if you look at the portfolio, overall, if you look at the portfolio, 11 years ago at Hurricane Sandy, they've made a lot of progress. 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 Was buildings that didn't have electricity, didn't have away. The top priority that I think NYCHA has wisely embraced is to make sure that when the water goes away, there aren't the lingering problems. That is not to say they have solved everything, and I don't think anybody at NYCHA would say that they have solved everything. I do think their sustainability and resilience team is really Baruch houses. I don't carry the details in my head. I'd be very happy personally to follow up with you and perhaps even talk to NYCHA jointly.
Thank you. You are very confident in NYCHA, and yes, we will we will follow up. Thank you so much. That's all. Thank you.
Councilmember Sandy Nurse, who had to leave. For Parks, Assistant Commissioner, Councilmember Nurse's first question is Parks considering allowing experienced large community compost organizations like Big Reuse to compost on appropriate parkland sites?
Well, we do already have composting on parkland sites at certain locations. I don't know if perhaps Sarah Nielsen, my colleague, might want to address that in any more detail.
Can you please raise your right hand?
Once I wrestle this chair. There we go.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth today?
Yes. 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 Is about whether Parks is contemplating, adding additional compost facilities. Is that correct?
Organizations, especially like Big Reuse, to compost on the appropriate park sites.
Right, right. So appreciate the question. This is definitely something that the agency has been talking about with sanitation as far as managing their new compost need with the influx of with their work. So I think it's something that the agencies are, addressing together. We do know that there's such a huge demand of parks facilities facilities, and there's other city land that might be appropriate. Like a more fulsome answer for you, although I have a feeling that, but I don't have the specifics for you.
Sure. Well, I'll let Councilmember Nurse know too, and would be helpful to have more information on that point as well.
Absolutely, we can do that.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
That concludes the questions from our panel. Oh, anything else, Jim? You good? All right. Well, thank you so much to all. Well, thank you so much to all. Well, thank you so much to all. We very much appreciate it. All right. What we'll do is we'll call up about 3 members of the public at a time for testimony. If you can, we'd urge you to keep your testimony to 2 minutes, and we'll start the clock as soon as you start speaking. So our first 3 panelists are
Lynn Kelly and Robert Camacho. Sharice Palimo, Lynn Kelly, and Robert Camacho.
And stay behind, okay? Okay, so, right. We got that covered. Okay, so, right. We got that covered.
Okay. 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 Okay.
Why don't you start, Adam? Good to see you.
There were 3 names called, and there's just one of me.
Robert Monaco, Prospect Park Alliance, Lynn Kelly, Parks and Open Space Partners,
organizations, environmental organizations, infrastructure, et cetera. %14 of the city. These green spaces should be collect, store, collect, store, collect, store, collect, store, collect, store. And for New Yorkers and for the environment. These parks employment positions being eliminated. These are straight up operations, safety, cleanliness, and accessibility positions again. And accessibility positions again. And accessibility positions again. And accessibility positions again. Its own measure. Our parks have cannot afford to cut our park system, especially as our city is
Adam, thank you so much, New Yorkers for Parks.
Thank you. I'm Corey Hassan. I'll be testifying on behalf of Lynn Kelly, who had to leave early. Thank you, Chairs Krishnan and Gennaro, and committee members for having this important hearing, which is very timely considering the citywide flooding on September 29th. I'm Lynn Kelly, and I'm the Executive Director of the New York Restoration Project and co-chair of NYC Parks and Open Space Partners Coalition. Today, I'm testifying on behalf of the NYC Parks and Open Spaces, a coalition representing over 50 organizations that share ideas to address common challenges, amplify advocacy efforts, and offer technical assistance and guidance in service of an equitable answer to a complex situation in which human beings cuts of 15%, they could expect to see a devastating impact on our park system, which is still recovering from cuts made during COVID-19 and has fewer workers than it did before the pandemic. This austerity plan only furthers societal division during a time when we should be building community and ensuring the availability of critical services to new and current 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 tree canopy coverage. Achieving these goals are vital not only to make our city more sustainable and equitable, but also to combat the impacts of climate change. The time to implement these measures has never been more critical. These measures has never been more critical. These measures has never been more critical.
City Parks Foundation, New York League of Conservation Voters, and Emily Walker Natural Areas Conservancy.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Alia Sumro, and I'm the Deputy Director for New York City Policy at the New York League of Conservation Voters. Thank you, Chairs Krishnan and Gennaro, and members of the Park. Budget to parks. NYLCV is also a member to each other. Parks and green spaces make up 14%. Parks and green spaces make up 14% urban forest canopy in the city, and roughly half of the land managed by NYC Parks is directly on the water. Yet, New York City Parks receive less than 1% of the city's budget. We cannot maintain our park system, increase our tree canopy, or improve our waterfront resiliency if we cut our parks budget. All three coalitions show that over 600 organizations in the city support parks, open space, tree canopy, waterfront, environmental justice, and air quality emergencies and the heavy rainfall on the 20
Conservancy. Thank you to Chairs Krishnan and Gennaro and members. Parks, and in particular our natural areas, play a tremendous role in protecting and fostering a more resilient city. When it comes to our natural areas, the data nearly 70% of the carbon stored and 83% of the carbon sequestered by trees across the city. They are almost 10 degrees cool. Hospital bills from pollution-induced illness annually. They provide $2.2 billion in recreational value, $1.1 billion in public health value, and they soak up as much stormwater as $580 million worth of new green stormwater infrastructure. Despite these benefits, the stresses on our natural areas are tremendous, and without appropriate public investments in their care, we stand to lose these assets entirely. We are deeply alarmed by the citywide budget cuts that were announced in September. The mandated 5% budget cuts now in effect will have a catastrophic impact on the ability of NYC Parks to implement much of its work, including critical care for our natural will no longer be implemented. I also want to express our concern. One of NAC's trail maintainers is with us today in City Hall, and I just want to note that her work exemplifies the kind of care that we should be performing for NYC's land, and we're taking away crucial funding to help support that work. But also believe that the urgency of this moment requires us to speak out about further constraints on the budget for parks. Parks and natural areas benefit the lives of every New Yorker, from longtime residents to our most recent arrivals. We understand that moments of crisis demand hard choices from our electeds, but we also believe that these choices should not come at the expense of shared resources that make our city in climate crisis. We call on our elected officials from every level of NYC's government to work together to restore the proposed budget cuts and prevent additional cuts to services that make our city stronger. Thank you.
That encourages New Yorkers to use and care for their neighborhood parks and open 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 care for their neighborhood parks and open. By encouraging the community to conduct water testing, we reveal connecting children to their waterfronts while actively engaging Additionally, we support resolution number 608 as the effects of climate change are rapidly threatening our city. Few New Yorkers can deny the absolute devastation caused by the many storms hitting our city. City Parks Foundation has been able to respond swiftly after the to reduce spending dangerously threatens our park system.
Support of Intro 1069.
Kay Webster and Corey Hassan for the New York Restoration Project, the Sarah Roosevelt Park, and North Broadway Parks Alliance.
You may begin. Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, especially you're still here. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. You're still here. Really appreciate it. Sarah Roosevelt Park Community Coalition. It's a 40-year-old volunteer organization on the Lower East Side in Chinatown in New York City, an environmental justice area, and we're a Playfair member. And my park is just a short ways from here. I have a lot of things I wrote. I will say that green spaces are the first responders to severe climate impacts that we know are not going to get better. We know we matter. We know we matter. We know we matter. We know we matter. Somebody taking care of them, heat island effect. Electricity isn't, you can't do it in some tenements, you can't have an AC. We have homeless people who will never, ever have air conditioning until you can plant other plants that are more resilient. There are a lot of things we can do. Your comments, Councilmember Krishnan, because this is untenable. I mean, parks are the places where all neighborhoods come together. There are resiliency centers. There are worker resiliency centers. If you don't pay parks employees a decent wage with a real future, what do you expect them to do? So I really thank you. Sorry, whatever.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello again. Good afternoon. My name is Corey.
Weren't you just here? Weren't you just here?
It's my stunt. I have a twin brother, so yeah.
You couldn't change your shirt or put a hat on or
Yeah, I
something?
should have got the fake. Yeah, I should have got the fake. New York Restoration Project. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony again this afternoon, Chair Krishnan and Chair Gennaro. NYRP is a proud member of the Play Fair Coalition, a coalition of 400 organizations across the city advocating for the city's park system. NYRP system, NYRP system, NYRP system, NYRP partners. We are here today in opposition to administration's proposed austerity cuts of 15%, which would devastate the already chronically underfunded and understaffed New York City parks. Climate change is at our doorstep. Only 12 days ago, NYC was ravaged by flooding, underscored the need for the city to invest in proven solutions and green infrastructure such as parks, waterfronts, and open space. Parks can reduce water runoff by 90% and filter out as much as 95% flooding and erosion. NYRP's work with the living shoreline at Sherman Creek Park in northern Manhattan is creating wetlands and oyster habitats, which are protecting shorelines and providing natural defenses against flooding for the community. NYRP's investment in this critical green infrastructure also allows for public waterfront access while improving the ecological health of the park, something too rare in New York City, especially in underserved communities. These new wetlands are storing carbon and removing nitrogen from waters at surprisingly high rates. This means parks have been operating with an austerity budget for 50 years. An underfunded parks department means less maintenance workers and PEP officers who keep the parks clean and safe. NYRC's forested areas soak up as much as stormwater as $580 million worth of new green stormwater infrastructure. New York City's natural areas are 4 to 6 degrees cooler than the average temperature during extreme heat events. Extreme heat events.
Here we go, yep.
Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go.
Hi, thank you so much for holding this hearing. My name is Annie Carforo. I'm the Climate Justice Campaign Manager representing We Act for Environmental Justice. We Act for Environmental Justice. Green spaces and access to the waterfront are not equitably distributed across the city. Access to green spaces is on average much lower in environmental justice neighborhoods that are already plagued by adverse health problems and high levels of pollution. Low-income communities have 21% less park space, 21% less park space, 21% less park space. Austerity cuts of 5 to 15% will further decrease that live in environmental justice communities who are disproportionately Black and Latinx and who need green space and park space the most. I have an anecdotal told us that East Harlem is a hostile environment for baby trees.